All right, Jim, I think we should probably get started.
You want to kick off? Okay. So we've got a handful of folks out there. All I will say is don't look outside, anybody, because it's horrible out there and you're not missing anything. Tonight, we're going to do lightning talks, and people are pretty proficient on their Zoom meetings these days, but just let you know how it's going to flow. Everybody will be on mute. If you do have a question, please go down to the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen and just type in your question. Maybe put the name of the speaker at the time and then your question, and we will communicate that question to the speaker. We'll also have an opportunity at the end where you can raise your hand and have a little bit more of an open platform. And the rest of it, I think probably everybody's pretty comfortable with and proficient. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our CEO and founder, Joe Dillon, for the introductions.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and welcome to the QASIG on Zoom. Obviously, this is a first, but the show must go on, I suppose. Corner's been hosting and organizing these events for 19 years, and has only missed one in all those times. But we made up for it last week with a special even-numbered week presentation. So I guess we're even. And speaking of anniversary, today is the 20th anniversary of the first party we ever had at Cordev. We opened our doors on Monday, the 11th of July in 2000. On that Friday, we had a little happy hour after work. So we were going to do something special tonight, but I guess I'll have to wait till next time. So for our first speaker, Mike Lyles, he's a director of QA and project management, and he's been with multiple organizations, and he'll be giving a speak on the forensics of testing. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and get a screen share. This one. You can see it okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right, here we go. 10 minutes. People that know me know it's hard for me to do. But the thing we're going to talk about today is the forensics of testing, and I'll explain to you why I'm talking about it, and then also I'll give you some insights on how that it can apply to your day-to-day job. Thanks for the great introduction. I won't go through much of this, but I do have a new book out called The Drive-Thru is Not Always Faster. Not very relevant right now with drive-thrus being the only way right now, but it's 99 cents on ebook, so that's my only little sales pitch for that. It's a great motivational book. But today we're going to talk about forensics, the forensics of testing, and I want to share with you an addiction that I have, and it is I am addicted to crime shows. Can't stop. And I think most testers would say they're somewhat addicted as well. If you've watched them, if you haven't, get ready, because if you start watching crime shows, you're going to see that it is very addictive. Dateline was my first. I started watching 48 Hours on CBS, very similar. There's always a scene, and then you try to figure out what's going on, and it gets you drawn into it because you don't really know how it's going to end. And then Investigation Discovery. If any of you don't know this channel on DirecTV or cable, it's 24-hour crime shows, and I'm addicted. It's on. I had to turn it off just before this presentation because I got it on 24 hours a day watching it a lot of the times. But the things that these shows do is they have a common theme, and that's how they draw you into it, and that's how they get us addicted as testers, because they start out with an initial tease. The show will start, it'll give you some background. Woman found dead in her kitchen. What happened? And the husband is there. He's got blood on his shirt. You immediately think with those incremental facts that he's the killer. It's got to be him. They start giving you misleading cues and clues, and you start drawing your own conclusions through the episode of, I know exactly who committed this crime and who is responsible and who is guilty. But as the show gets closer to the end, you start getting more details, and there may be an anonymous tip, or they may go to a surveillance camera, there's another great show on Investigation Discovery called See No Evil, which is all about surveillance cameras and how they catch people that they wouldn't have caught any other way. But it ends with a final surprise, and many times it's not the person you thought it was going to be, and it's not exactly how you thought it was going to end. At the first, if you start drawing conclusions, you quickly realize that you've made a conclusion way too quick. And as testers, we can't do that. So why is testing versus forensics something that I want to talk about today? And I'm going to give you 4 points. The first point is, don't be fooled by initial findings. Use what you find, but continue to investigate. Keep up with more than just defects. A lot of companies I work with, my teams will log a lot of things, and we get into discussions about whether or not that should be logged with a defect. Well, you don't have to put it in as a defect. You can track your own observations in your notes, but keep really good notes of what you're doing. Track your results of what you're finding along the way, what things look weird to you. And you may not know if it's a defect yet. Just track what you're doing and take really good notes on your progress, because as with forensic science and with crime scene investigations, some of those tips that you may have taken down that was not very consequential at the time become really important later on. Number 2, don't rule anything out initially. Crime scene investigators, you'll watch them on the shows, they'll quickly put the tape around. There's always the well-known yellow tape that says police lines don't cross. And they lock down the scene and try to keep things from being contaminated. But then they start looking for clues everywhere. And they start looking for every major and minor detail that they can find. Every single thing that they can see on a crime scene, they want to pull it in. Nothing is inconsequential at first, because they want to make sure that they just take notes on everything they see. They may or may not use that information later. And as testers, we have to do the same thing. We start building facts as we start testing. We shouldn't be ruling anything out until we're done. In other words, number 3 is innocent until proven guilty. Now, testers, I would say it's broken until proven quality. But when you see a crime scene or a homicide where someone is murdered in the house, the first thing the investigators do is they start with the family, and they start working from the inside out. And as testers, we can start with those core functions and start looking at the core requirements of the project, but we really need to explore with higher coverage beyond and outside of that, the initial requirements. If you're working with a company that requires you to write step 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then test that ways, then do it, but go beyond those test cases, go beyond those steps. Number 4, and the last one's number 4, is compile the results. Great investigators are always in continuous discovery mode. They share it with the community, they post things on the news, and then they start getting inputs from the outside. And a lot of times they'll be analyzing their findings over and over and looking at how to take the input that they're getting from the community and draw their conclusions there. With testing, continuous testing and evaluation is critical. And the thing that I had someone tell me in an interview one time, I always ask the question, when do you stop testing? And I had someone say, when they tell me I'm out of money or I'm out of time. Great testers don't stop. We just keep testing until we're told we have to. And one way or the other we do. But today I'm going to challenge you, not ask you, that testers must be partners in crime. And crime, by what I mean with crime, is C-R-I-M-E. C is collaboration, requirements, investigate, mind map, and explore. If you do these 5 things, then you're setting yourself up for success. There's a lot of expansion on that, and it's more than I can tell you in 10 minutes, but I'll tell you quickly, collaboration is critical. Years ago, we worked in silos. The development team did the work, they handed it over to the test team, and we tested it, we verified it was ready to go. We can't work that ways anymore. With agile environments, fast sprints, and the need to get to the market faster and faster, we have to work together and as a partnership. Requirements, understanding the stakeholders is critical. Michael Bolton, a great tester and a leader in the testing industry, said, the one advice he would give to testers is to get very close to the stakeholders. And it's really important to understand not only what they want, but how they want to use it and how they're going to use it. And you do that long before the development is done. So understand those requirements early. Investigate early. And again, increase your coverage. Really look at things beyond just the test cases and how the development is working, but look at design, user interface, go beyond the scripts, and really be involved in that early process of understanding, is this really what the stakeholders want with their product? And my favorite one, which I could talk about for 10 hours, not 10 minutes, is mind mapping. If you're not familiar with mind mapping, and if this is the first time you've ever heard that term, please Google it, or please email me and ask me about it, because I can share with you all the things I've done with mind mapping. But mind mapping gives you the ability to do some really great things. The applications in the middle here is just an example, some features that you have, and then how you're testing those things. It's just an example mind map, but it's very creative, kind of like Visio, but it puts things in a very pictorial diagram for you. There's some great software out there for mind mapping. Xmind is the one that I use here. Coggle is one that a lot of people use, but then here's some from last year that were really standing out, and that's M. E is explore, and really go beyond the test cases. I've said it multiple times, but I want to drive that point home in this 10 minutes that I have with you, and that is whether you want to write test cases or you're told to write test cases and test steps, that's fine. Let the mind map, let the investigation, let your coverage plan and your coverage approach to testing be how you do your testing, not just 10 steps and you're done and it passed and failed. Think beyond that. Be someone who asks a lot of questions and build a lot of conclusions based on what you do. Just like in a private investigator would, a forensic investigator would not just quickly draw a conclusion when they come into the room and see the crime scene. They would build their evidence and then take their decisions from there. And I'll say this, the drive-through is not always faster. It's not just the name of a book. I've sat in lines many times watching people go in and get their food and come out when I'm still sitting in line. So I stopped doing that. I go into the stores a lot of times or the restaurants and I do that. And I have dogs who I've told my family not to bark. They're barking out my window. We'll take care of that later. But the drive-through is not always faster, means that don't do things just because of convenience. Don't do things because it's the way everybody else is doing it. And don't do things just because that's the way we've always done it. Try to be different, because things are going to change. Projects are going to change. Projects are going to change. And a year ago, nobody would have known what this picture is, but we all know what it is today. So things are going to change. As testers, we need to be investigators, investigative reporters, forensic investigators. And so my challenge to you is treat your projects with crime and be a partner in crime. And the thing I always do at every presentation is tell you, you have the potential to be remembered for the things that you've done today, tomorrow, and onward. And you don't have to be famous to do it. You can change the world right where you are today doing exactly what you're doing. So what are you doing to be great? And that is 10 minutes.
Oh, you were right on there.
You were
Even with
spot
the dogs, even with the dogs.
on.
I'll
Yeah.
kill 3 dogs in a minute.
Well done.
Let's see if there's questions. We have a few minutes for questions.
Yes.
Jim?
So please feel free to type them into Q&A, or if you can think of one during another one of the presentations, just be sure to put it in there and start it with for Mike, and then we can circle back to it at the end. I'm not seeing anything in questions or chat just yet, but again, go ahead and put those in if you have specific questions. Start with the presenter and your question, and we'll circle back to it at the end.
Also, they could raise their hand right now if somebody has something.
There's one. So actually, mind mapping, and you want me to answer them?
Sure.
Yeah, fire away.
Okay. So where does mind mapping fit into your testing process? My testers are context-driven testers. We follow the context-driven testing school. If you've not heard of that, email me and I'll send you some great links that'll get you started. It's an amazing process. And what we do with mind mapping is we understand the product and we start mapping out what does the product look like, what are the requirements, what are the features, how are we going to evaluate these things, and we build on it just like you're taking notes. Like if you were going to a class and you start studying, you learn as you go and you build on it and it branches out. So we actually use mind maps instead of test steps and test cases. We have test scenarios and data plans and how we're going to, what data we're going to use in high level scenarios, but we use mind mapping to really, and what I find with mind mapping is that your project manager, your product manager, your developers, everybody can speak that language. And that's what the beauty of mind mapping does for me is that, they don't want to look at your test plans or your test scripts. You don't want to look at their BRDs and their user stories. But if you look at a mind map, it really kind of blends everything together and it has you speak the same language.
Great. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Great graphics too. Did you do all of those, or that part of the perks of having?
Yeah, I'm such a nerd about it. I do so many presentations. It just gets into me.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us too. I guess one of the other perks of having a Zoom meeting is that we can have people from all over the place. I don't know if you're all aware that Mike's on the East Coast, or at least East Coast time.
Yes, North Carolina.
All right, moving on.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Our next presenter is Cindy Ponko, senior recruiter here at CorDev, and she's going to be talking about recruiting in the time of COVID.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for making some time. Mike, that was awesome. Thank you very much. I'm going to try to share my screen here, so bear with me, if you could. All right. Can everybody see it okay? We are, as Mike mentioned, we are in just a very unique time that even 6 months ago I couldn't have imagined. And one thing that's been coming up a lot for a lot of our teams and for a lot of our hiring managers is just how this pandemic is impacting their recruiting efforts, hiring efforts, and really all overall talent management and team engagement. So keeping people on track and excited and motivated for the marathon that we're a part of right now. So we just wanted to spend 10 minutes and just kind of go over what we're seeing in the industry. And so I just thought I'd put together a few slides and just highlight some of the top things. I'm on the recruiting team here. You are welcome to email me at any time or call me at any time with any questions that are specific to you, either as a job seeker or as a team member or as a hiring manager. And myself and our team will be happy to help in any way we can. So let's get started. These are really tips for hiring managers as well as job seekers, because we have a lot of folks out there that are finding themselves either furloughed or needing to jump into something new. Let me see if I can get this to work. And it is actually frozen a little bit. So the overview really of the talk today, we're going to talk about three things. What is the impact of COVID on hiring? How do we navigate the changes that those impacts are having on us? And then first and foremost, we'll probably have this top of mind, how do we implement safety plans for where we are today and of course as where we want to go in the future? Right now, the greatest impact that we are seeing is that recruiting, so starting with recruiting, it is now 100% remote, and that's changing a lot of the variables with regard to recruiting. Face-to-face meetings, catching somebody in a cafe, all of those types of engagements are really on hold. So right now, everything is 100% remote. It's changing the way we communicate, and it's changing the way we try to identify and connect with potential talent and the people that we'd like to bring onto our team. The other really big change, and I know we here at CorDev are doing a lot of this as well, is interviewing. The process of interviewing potential candidates for our teams has gone virtual. And that's creating a whole world of new opportunity as well as some challenges. So we can kind of talk about some of the ways to overcome those, whether it's using new digital tools, video conferencing tools, such as the one we're using right now, and just some other platforms that have been really effective. Email me if you have specific questions about those. I'll just let you know off the top of our heads. Right now, Skype is working really well, and Zoom is working really well, Google Hangouts, and then a couple of the other really popular ones as well are working. Something people are not really talking about, probably if we're in collaboration with our teams, day-to-day during the workday, but something that is being discussed when we're doing some like online socializing, or maybe you're running into somebody as you're going for a walk, or you're safely distanced at a park, is that motivations for changing jobs have changed significantly. So candidates are really trying to avoid additional risk in their lives right now. So as recruiters and hiring managers, any way that we can help them to have confidence in joining our team will put us ahead 1,000 feet and super fast to get them to consider us seriously. But we are seeing a lot of risk aversion out there as far as making a job change right now. And then probably the biggest thing we're all experiencing is that remote work is now the new normal. And that's creating some interesting opportunities. We can work with team members from all over the world. And we also have to find new ways to keep that collaboration and communication going so that we can keep projects and goals on task. So how are the teams kind of navigating those changes that we kind of just talked about? The changes are impacting each of us differently. So whether you're a job seeker, you're a team member, or you're a manager, how these changes are impacting you might be very different from how they're impacting others. For the teams as a whole, teams are going virtual. So that is creating situations where we just have to make sure that everybody's aware. Are we making sure that we're using the same communication platforms? Are we making sure that everybody has access to be online at the same time for the meetings that are most important? Are we making sure that we're doing some follow-up? So we all connect on Zoom, we have this great collaboration, we're all good on the project. Are we making sure to do those follow-up points to keep us on track? The remote work is the new normal for a lot of the teams. How do we balance the dogs coming into the office? How do we balance the needs of family that are often at home with us? These are all questions that we are addressing. Communication expectations really, I think, are key to keeping teams cohesive and keeping teams on track to meet their goals. And when we talk about communication expectations, we're really talking about how do we want to be communicating with each other? For instance, if our team is a fan of Slack, we're going to use that channel a lot. If we tend to be LinkedIn communicators, we're going to use that platform. If we are emailers, we're going to use that. But let's collectively decide on a standard for communication. And let's collectively decide what our expectation is. Do we do a morning check-in, noon check-in, and end of day? Are we checking in once a week? Let's just put those questions out there and create some standardization around those. This is actually coming up a lot because we've been in this marathon now for a little while. Some teams are kind of asking, what about our goals? You know, we had these goals before all of this started. Are we still held to those goals? Can we be flexible? What are we going to do? So speaking to that and keeping that on the forefront of your minds, I think is really, really important to keep your teams going and to keep yourself as a team member happy. And then probably the most important thing that all of us are encouraging our team members to do and trying to be mindful of ourselves is to keep that marathon mindset. We really don't know how things are going to unfold. We only know what's happening in this moment. We can do our best to predict for the future, but keeping that marathon mindset, I think, is going to be really important for all of us moving forward. Managers have a lot on their plate right now. Because remote work is the new normal, they have to rethink how they engage with their team members, rethink how they manage their projects and the deliverables, and all of the things that are coming up on the roadmap. Consistent engagement is absolutely critical at this time. Make sure that you're reaching out to your team members on a regular basis. And this is like one-on-one reaching out, even if it's sending a quick 2-sentence email every Monday. Just make sure it's consistent and make sure it's happening. Let them know that you are engaged and that you are valuing their contribution, even though you can't see it in the office. It's just a very different dynamic. So that consistent engagement is absolutely critical. Something that hiring managers are asking about is, how do we manage our team members from the perspective of their performance reviews and working with them on career paths, really helping them to know that we are thinking about that aspect of their career, even though we're in the middle of this pandemic. I see this as a huge plus for where we are right now, because today we have an opportunity to kind of set aside the professional I call them kind of walls that we have to put up from time to time. And we have an opportunity to really get to know the people that are supporting us as managers, and have an opportunity to really develop some personalized plans for them. So kind of make sure that we are all doing that. Virtual hiring is happening now. What are the best practices around that? One thing that is absolutely important for any manager that is trying to do the hiring process virtually is to ensure that they can track what they're communicating, whether it's a video recording or email records, that they are tracking that process with the candidate, and also ensuring that they have all of the end tools necessary to hire that person if it turns out, wow, that was a fabulous interview. This is somebody I really want to bring onto my team. So making sure that HR and hiring managers are aligned, whether it's e-doc signing tools or you name it, just making sure that you're aligned on that so that you can process those hires quickly. And then the one thing that is really interesting, we have a couple of managers that talk about this a lot with their teams now that we're kind of further along in this situation, and that is they're really trying to keep it sticky. They're trying to pick one or two things that has become like the team glue, if you will, whether that's once a month they all get online and play a game together, or maybe it's an online beer 30 in some cases. It's up to the culture, of course, of the team, but keeping it sticky is super, super important to help navigate these changes. Job seekers, I don't know how many of you out there are job seekers right now. The landscape obviously has changed significantly in many ways. And if you take out the aspect of just the chaos and the uncertainty, in many ways, the fact that hiring has gone virtual you can really play that to your advantage right now. Keeping your consistent communication with recruiters, hiring managers, the people you meet during virtual hiring events, that's going to set you apart. A lot of folks aren't doing that. So make sure that you are. To help navigate this change and these changes even faster, take this time to really polish your brand. And what I mean by that is fill out your LinkedIn profile. Make sure that when we're searching for you and your social profiles come up, make sure that they are showing us what you want us to see about you. I can't tell you how many times that has come up. So just be mindful of that and kind of go through your feeds every once in a while and ask yourself, is this a message I want to be sending to potential teams and employers? And if not, change it up. And then probably the most important thing right now is thinking like a recruiter, thinking like a manager. There are many people sending in resumes to job openings without having really read that job opening, the requirements and expectations for the role. Do your homework, revise your profile and your resume to meet the expectations for that specific role that you're applying to. Think like the manager. Ask yourself, if I'm the manager and I'm asking for this type of talent, what am I probably going to want to see on a profile? Build your profile to that. It's a little extra work up front, but you can actually keep those on file. So you might have, maybe you're a data engineer, and you might have one that's really highlighting the environment you're comfortable with. Maybe you're going to have one that highlights some of the automation experience you bring to the table. Just really be cognitive of that, and really think that it helps people to bubble up to the top for consideration. So it's really an important thing to do. And then here's the most important for your overall success. And I think really for all of us, whether we're a team member, a manager, especially when we're a job seeker, choose your wave. There is an ocean of opportunity out there, even in the middle of a pandemic. There is an ocean of opportunity for you. But you only succeed when you are riding your wave, right? When that flow and connection is there. So when you get into a situation where you have maybe 2 or 3 opportunities before you, really choose carefully. Choose your wave, because we are kind of in a marathon situation. And when you do make that change to a new team, you're going to want to make sure that the flow and the connection is there so that you can stay with it for the long haul. This is kind of I was originally going to start with this, and I was going to chat with Shelley about it because I know this has been really important to her and it has helped me feel safe as well with regard to our team here at Corda. But implementing a safety plan, even though we're still mostly working remote, is still very critical for your existing team and for any potential person you're going to bring onto the team. Shelley was gracious enough, she kind of shared with me how her thought process and how she went through developing the plan for our core dev test team. And we actually have a lab here at core dev in Seattle. You could think of it as like nearshore testing services. And then we also have kind of end-to-end technology services. So it's, it's an office within an office, and it poses some challenges right now because there are some things that really have to be tested in person. A lot, of course, we can do virtually, but some things really do involve real people in a real room at the same time. And so how do we approach that? And one thing Shelley did was the first thing she did was, well, we're going to have a plan. And let's start the plan with where we are right now. And she basically laid out for the team to help them with their sense of security, the ins and outs of when can you come to the office? What are the protocols around that? What do you do if you're scheduled to come in and you're not feeling well? What are the expectations around that as well? When is it on you to kind of raise your hand and say, you know what, this is no longer going to be safe. Here's why I won't be, and so I won't be coming into the office. And really kind of creating a document and a set of expectations around that. It has been super helpful, and it has created just a very nice cushion of confidence for everybody who's involved in the lab downstairs. And then of course, making sure that plan involves how are we going to change to meet the changing conditions is also super critical. So the end of the marathon happens, we get to open up, we get to talk about how are we going to integrate our teams back into an in-office model. So make sure that that's included in the plan. And those are kind of those are basically the impacts of this pandemic on how we're working today, how people are starting to navigate that successfully. And then of course, just making sure we have a plan around safety for right now, and then also plans around safety for moving forward. I know that's a lot to digest. Does anybody have any questions right now?
There are a couple out there, Cindy. First one from Chris, who asks, it says, the old-fashioned whiteboard coding interview is a process that has lots of problems. Does the new world of remote interviews actually help fix this in any way?
Well, it depends on the person. Some people really enjoy the fact that virtual hiring and virtual interviewing has transitioned us from the in-office whiteboard interview to online interviews or online coding challenges. In some cases, we even have take-home coding challenges. People that are comfortable with that dynamic, so they are comfortable, confident about their code, confident that they understand the coding style of the team that they are about to join or that they'd like to join, it's a huge win for them. Folks that are, I'm going to use the word intuitive. So folks that when they're at the board and they're solving a problem at the board, they've almost split their focus to some degree. So part of their focus is on meeting the expectation of the code challenge, using their knowledge and their technical skill and ability. Another part of their focus is reading the room. So they're actually picking up on people's changes in breathing pattern. Are people shifting in their chairs? Did somebody raise their eyebrows? They're using those signals and signs to help them check their code as they go, actually. So it's going to really depend on the person. What I do like about moving to virtual code challenges is it saves everybody a ton of time. We don't have to wait for 6 people to all have the same 3-hour block available. It has made the speed for the hiring process much better, I think, and much more respectful of the candidate and their time.
Okay. Hopefully that answers that for you, Chris. One from Mike that says, do you feel that many companies will continue to do remote working even after COVID is long gone?
And I think that's going to depend on the team, the product that they're supporting, what is their business model. We've had a couple, I have a couple of people that they know now that they will be forever remote. They are trying to kind of evaluate, how does that align for them? Is that the wave, if you will, that they want to be riding? It really depends on the company. I think that it's important to be talking about that as a team, as a manager with your team. The what ifs, be asking yourselves, there is a possibility that we'll be remote indefinitely. How do we feel about that? What processes are working now that might need to be changed in order to meet that expectation long term? So it's really going to depend on the company.
Thank you, Cindy. Thanks for your
Okay.
time and for your presentation. That was great.
Oh, great, thank you, Cindy. Good to go, Chris?
You bet.
All right.
Next speaker is Chris Wiswell.
Try to unshare my screen.
He's a senior software test manager.
Oh, good.
And he's a former Cornell employee. He also worked at Institute for Disease Modeling and has just started a new, exciting, fun job, which I'm sure he'll mention during his talk. So this talk's going to be about testing testing the COVID-19 model. Is that right? Did I get it right?
You bet.
All right, over to you, Chris.
Great. So I'm going to go a little bit fast here, but I'm going to try to avoid too much jargon, and hopefully I'm going to tell you a story and y'all might learn something. So let's talk about how to test software without being a scientist. So first of all, we'll go into the backstory a little bit about me and sort of where I was as of this time last year. So I've been at the Institute for Disease Modeling since 2013. I've been a test manager there since about 2015. The Institute for Disease Modeling, our stock in trade, is running computational models, or simulations, if you will, of how infectious diseases spread through populations. Traditionally, we've worked on things in the rest of the world. So diseases like malaria, HIV, polio. You can see them on the slide, and a few other things. So a little bit of typhoid, a little bit of tuberculosis. These were our bread and butter diseases. We published dozens of papers in really respected journals using our simulation software to help answer questions. To do that, we have our flagship model, which is called eMod. eMod is a richly configurable piece of software. It's C++ with tooling in Python that can be configured to do lots and lots of different things. And so we're one of the best institutions in the world at modeling disease transmission with one of the most powerful tools. Then, of course, COVID hits. So as it turns out, there's a lot of diseases that make the news. During the course of a normal year, lots of things will come across our news feeds, and I'll occasionally go and ask our modelers what they think of them. Most of the time, the answer is, well, that seems kind of bad, but it's probably not something we need to worry about. In November of last year, that story was very different. And the first reaction I got from somebody taking a look at data we were looking at was, yeah, this one looks really bad. And the sad part was, as it became clear that COVID-19 was going to be a problem we were going to need to tackle, not merely remotely, but in our own country, our best tool, our most powerful model, was not the tool ready to do it. There's a bunch of optimizations in the eMod model that make it really good for doing certain kinds of disease modeling, malaria and measles being sort of the ones it's most tuned for. But COVID-19 required some things that we weren't really well suited toward, like contact tracing and different forms of social isolation that weren't usually used in the other diseases we model. However, the good news is IDM is continually growing, and it recently brought in a new a new modeler with some powerful new tools. Enter QASIG. So when I first approached QASIG with the project of, I should probably test this if we're planning on writing papers based on this software, I was really clearly out of my comfort zone. So I was used to working with a model I'd been using for the last 7 years that ran in certain ways. We had all these engineering practices, and you can see on the slide here under the EMOD column, things were strongly typed, things were well-defined, we understood the software, and we had several years of engineering expertise and process built around building and testing this model. On the QASIG side, it was different. So a lot of things were done in ways I wasn't familiar with. So instead of writing a configuration file and having your model consume it, configuration was done in the code itself. That sounds a little esoteric, but go with me for a moment. The critical bit was, this is very much not like what I was used to doing, and I didn't have any of my infrastructure to rely on. When I finally approached the modeler and said, I'd like to start testing your model, from your professional point of view, where should I begin? The response was, I'm doing test-driven development, so you really don't need to test anything. Just give me some code coverage numbers. This was a little disappointing, and as a professional software tester, felt a little disheartening. But then it was time for a little collaboration and a little compromise. Running off the power of humility, I started by reaching out to the developer after fumbling around with a couple of attempts at writing automated test cases. And we came to some agreements about how I could test this in a reasonable way. The first agreement was that I could run the model the way the modeler wanted me to. As you see in the little bit of code there, running QASIG is very simple. That's just a screen cap from the README, which you can see on the website. And it was only 4 lines of code to make a simulation run. So I could learn to run the model in the way the modeler did, not through the heavyweight regression harness I was used to. Secondly, I got an agreement from the modeler when I explained why this was important to me, for them to document the parameters of the model and what they did. He even went so far as to add, in some cases, here's the test I think you should create for this parameter. And in some cases, he was pretty close to what I would want to do in the first place. So that was great. And I learned to live with relative validation. I'll talk a little bit more about those parameters and relative validation on the next couple of slides. So firstly, let's take a look at one of the 2 anchor points we had here. By anchor point, I mean, I need a way for my worldview to map onto the way the modeler sees his worldview. So we can come to an agreement about which parts we want to test and how we want to go about this. This is his code. So these are some parameters from the model at the time. And you can see there, this is all Python code, and we got a little dictionary with entries. And the entry labeled letter N tells you how many people should be susceptible to coronavirus. This was something I could work with, and I could see for each parameter, there was a comment telling me a little bit about what the parameter did. And I could start thinking in terms of how would I go through the normal test workflow of validating that a parameter is honored. So I'd write some code of my own. And over here is my anchor point that maps to that, which are my unit test support classes. These, as you can see here, it's also a Python file. But what I'm doing is I'm just mapping a string that's meaningful to me to the strings that the model needed to know. So in the case of that parameter that is the letter N, I decided that a more valuable name was number agents. This is an agent-based model, which is a little bit of a term of art. Basically, that means in the simulation, we have code that represents each individual person rather than just counts of people. And I need to know how many of those there were. So I have a parameter for that. There's an interesting anecdote about that particular parameter. If I manage to finish in a reasonable amount of time, maybe I can tell you. So what did we do? Well, we created some tests. And here's how we divided things up. The tests that the modeler had already created when he said he'd done test-driven development, were of the, I run a script, it doesn't fail, and then I sort of squint at the graph for a while and nod and go, that looks about like what I thought it would do. And that was his way of testing the larger properties of the model. Does this disease arc look like I think Seattle would look like? Does this look like I think Addis Ababa would look like? And that was his area. My area was to make sure that the smaller features of the model, the individual parameters, were being honored in a way we would expect. And I'll talk about that relative validation here. So these were things that I would write myself using the unit test module. And if we consider something simple like the number of agents, for example, I could say, if I set the number of agents to 100, and then I check the output of the model and ask how many people were in the simulation at time step 0, it should tell me 100. Really straightforward. And then you can loop through several different values and make sure that they work correctly. That's more of an absolute validation. Relative in this case is what we call the turning the knobs kind of test. As I increase the infectiousness of the disease we're simulating, does it transmit to more people in a shorter amount of time. Now, I can't tell you with any level of precision exactly how many people I would expect to be infected in the 30th day of an epidemic, but I can tell you that if I set the transmissibility to, say, a value like 3, then there should be more people than if I set it to a value like 1. And that's the sort of thing we do with the relative validation that allows me to make sure each of the parameters is being honored in the right way. The frameworky stuff here. So when I showed you the unit test support class, this is an example of that sort of thing. And I was really happy to see that some of the things I put into my framework ended up help driving quality into the project. As the modeler was looking at my tests, at one point he asked me the question, why are you renaming all of my parameters? Why don't you just use the ones I had? My off-the-cuff answer was because letters are cheap and words are readable. But from my point of view, it was I wanted a single point of contact that he could be free to name his parameters whatever he wanted to, and I could make all my tests work by changing something in one place. So when the parameter n became the parameter population size, I changed one string on one line of code, and the dozens of tests that consume that parameter all worked the same way, and it was kind of cool. It also kept the actual test method smaller. So when I'm trying to share a test to someone else who might need to run it or read it later, the actual lines of code they needed to pay attention to became 10 to 12 lines and not 30 to 40 with a whole bunch of constants thrown in. Made it a little more readable. So what's the story? What's the real point I'm getting at here? When you're testing really specific software in a field that is not your own, and I'm not an epidemiologist, a virologist, an immunologist, or any of these things, you need to trust your SME to understand that part. The next thing you need to do is understand that you are a subject matter expert. You understand software and you understand how to test it. And you can apply your art and knowledge and skill to a very complex problem from a way that the researcher, or pardon me, the subject matter expert might not approach it in the same way. To do that, you need to find the anchors you can agree upon and use them. And I've got my totally rad MS Paint looking visualization for this. I hope you appreciate it. So from the researchers, in the researcher's mind are the requirements, what he believes the model ought to do and how it believes it ought to function. He codified those requirements in that parameters file where he documented what each of those parameters should do. I was able to consume that file and use my test design skill to create simulations that at the conclusion of the simulation, I could validate that that requirement was being met in the way I expected it to. Following the typical flow of a test case, you configure some software, you operate some software, you make some observations, and you evaluate those observations. All 4 steps were possible from the single parameter level. And at the meta level of, but is the model doing the thing we would expect it to? That's really out of my field. And I get to leave that to the subject matter expert who has a level of trust that each of the parameters is being honored, and I can have the level of trust in him that the scientific principles are being honored. There's a bunch of links to GitHub here. I'd be happy to share those with anyone who cares to see them. And with that, I think I got this within the 10.
You definitely did. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. Done this before.
Yeah.
I was on my front porch practicing no more than 35 minutes ago. I can't see the question UI from here. So I'm going to turn off my slide share. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to tackle one.
And if anybody wants to raise your hand, we can open up your microphone too. So just let us know.
Also, if I was being way esoteric, that's also okay. I could field them, whatever.
Can you see those, or would you like me to read those? So just,
please read for me.
Yes. What was the antidote you were talking about?
The anecdote about N. As it turned out, I actually, I kind of already gave it, but let's give you the more detailed version, is the parameter N drove me bananas, because as a person who does code reviews, if someone who worked for me labeled a variable N, I would go through the roof is not the right term. I would send it back to them and ask them to name it something I understood. In this case, the modeler thought that N was a perfectly good name for the number of people in the population. And I went ahead and put it in my support layer that it should be number of agents equals N. What I discovered a little while later was several of the parameters that I had renamed in that way, those names I had picked ended up migrating into the actual operating code. When other modelers came to the model, N was not as intuitive to them. It could mean number of people in the simulation, number of people who start out infected, or even something like how infectious is the disease itself. So I was really happy to see that some of my intuition in my renaming layer was valuable to other people.
Great. Park, does that answer your question about what was the story about it? I'm gonna assume yes. Mike asks, how do you feel test-driven development works with typical teams, and does it help you to be successful, or does it impact your work negatively?
Great question. There's a part of me that would like to defer that to someone in development, but I develop tests, so it's worthwhile talking about it. I have found, in this particular case, the test-driven development was actually pretty valuable. So this particular researcher, who's also a very talented and gifted Python coder, very seldom checked in things that were outright broken. And the initial effort for writing your tests for your test-driven development may seem a little bit pedantic, but I think that taking that extra time and that extra framework there makes the resulting code come out so much better the first time around. There's an old joke about cutting down a tree in 1 hour, and the joke is you spend the first 30 minutes sharpening your axe. Test-driven development I view as that sort of exercise. It just makes you more efficient. So I'm a fan. It's initially a pain, but I think it has value.
Great. Anybody else out there? Okay, I think we're good.
Well, nice job, Chris. And our first speaker tonight is Jim Frazier. He's a business development manager here at Cordell, and he'll be talking about how companies are opening up.
Yeah, so hi, everybody. Oftentimes we'll do one of these, and I don't think that everybody has a good feel for what it is we do internally here. So you met Cindy as a part of our recruiting team. I'm part of the business development team, and I've been doing this job in the Seattle market primarily for about 20 years. So I'm kind of on the client-facing side. So I'll spend most of my time trying to understand what the strategic initiatives are, doing the initial scoping, and we kind of go down two paths anytime we engage. One might be the managed service path, where we're going to bring a full team and a little bit more methodology and process with us. The other path might be the individual contributor. So if it looks like it's a project that we will have a team in our lab or on the client side, then we'll start bringing our technical leads like Park Blake in. He'll assign a lead to the project. And I guess the big differentiator is, are we owning it and managing it, or is the client owning it and managing it? And there's not a really sharp line in the sand on that, because oftentimes it'll be a little bit more collaborative, but that's what I do. As a part of that and being client facing, I've really been tracking how people are planning, if people are planning, their reopening processes. And I thought I would just share some of the stories about the way that different clients are managing that, because I get to see a few and they're a little bit different. So it's interesting, it's dynamic. Generally speaking, folks are trying to adhere to the CDC guidelines, but that's a moving target too. So that's kind of hard to do. But just as kind of an example of some of the things that folks are doing, and this is encouraging, because for some time, there wasn't a lot of this effort at all. People were trying to figure out how to cope with the remote working aspect, and they weren't really thinking about a structured plan on what that reopening looked like. And then little by little, I started to see folks pop up and actually have a formalized plan that they're sharing. So the first one of those is with one of our clients who is in the entertainment business. Or I guess I won't say who they are, but you'll probably get an idea. They have a full guidebook for contractors and contingency workers, and have they have a pretty good structure around what their expectations are. And it's a lot of the stuff that you have heard before. wearing a mask, washing your hands, completing a health check, which I thought was interesting. Avoid touching your face, distancing, disinfect the area, wear your ID. I thought that was an interesting one. And then just avoiding contact with those that may be ill. They'll actually, in the event that you need to be on site, you will be required to sign an attestation form that runs right down and says, yes, I've taken my temperature. They'll ask you, do you have any of these symptoms? And this is every day that you might be there. The good news is they'll actually supply you with these kits to make sure that you're in compliance with their processes as they go back to work. And the good news and the encouraging thing is that people are definitely thinking about this and figuring out the safest way to bring people back on board, and not just kind of wallowing in this, oh gosh, I can't I can't go into the office. Couple of other examples. Customer in the apparel business is really supply chain. They've got 8 warehouses across the country, excuse me. One of the things that they did that I thought was interesting is they didn't want to lay anybody off. Anybody that was on salary took a 25% pay cut in order for them not to lay anybody off. And they were able to retool some of their manufacturing and ended up with, I think it was a $500,000 mask contract with the government. And they've since taken the 25% pay hit away. People are happy about that, but people were also happy that they didn't end up laying folks off, which was great. Another customer in the gaming business, their first thing was just nobody on site. And that was a little tricky. Fortunately, these folks were very Zoom friendly even prior to the virus. So it was pretty easy for them to do that and roll into being able to conduct most of their work via Zoom. Interesting point, and this is not unique to these guys. What I have found with a lot of folks is that there is a hiring freeze. But if you're fortunate enough to be engaged, whether you're on contract and you have a statement of work written up about what you're doing, or whether you're full-time, these positions are good as gold, and you certainly want to hold on to them because they have a fairly easy time extending these out. They have a very difficult time requesting any funding for additional full-time workers or people on contract or project work. So just be aware. Same thing, I have a transportation company that was pretty much follows that same pattern of hiring freeze, but if you're in there, again, good as gold, hold on to that job because they will likely have funding for that long term. We work with another custom development shop. They had projects stacked up. Again, huge pent up demand. It's hard for them to move forward with some of their clients, primarily healthcare clients. But I certainly see as the dam starts to break here, there's going to be a lot of opportunity, and people are really thinking seriously about how and what they're going to do when that happens. I kind of look back to 07, 08, and even .com where when companies did not have a lot of money, they got really serious about figuring out how they were going to spend effectively and efficiently when they did come back online, because it was going to be time to ramp quickly. Another educational software company, of course, golden place to be right now because there's going to be a huge requirement for that. And again, they're trying to figure out what the magic is to get folks back on site, because in this instance, it is a requirement to be there for some of these things. And then on our part, we have developed a safe work plan. I think we've mentioned that we do have a lab in the basement, but we have some very specific steps about maintaining physical distance, no more than 5 people in a room at any particular point in time. We do have a self-certified policy as well, make sure that everybody's safe and healthy. But like the other folks, we have a structure and we understand that it is dynamic and it's absolutely going to change. But at least we want to start to put those pieces in place and be prepared for the opening when it happens. So I am very actively staying in touch with all of these folks to kind of see how it looks for them. And there certainly are signs of hope, but again, it is pretty dynamic. So we're checking in regularly to see what those policies are, what the practices are, and how we can best adhere to them. Most of the folks have kind of come to the realization that it is not going to be the same, and that there really is not a requirement to have a body in a chair on site to be productive. And this, you know, most folks say they absolutely do not see going back to the old way. There's just not a lot of value in that. So it will be a hybrid model, and there will be a lot more opportunity for remote work. And I guess the question is there for managers, you know, how do you set those metrics in place to make sure that your folks are being productive? But I think it's been a good kind of shot in the arm for folks to realize that people are very productive remotely. It's just going to be a slightly different model going forward. So definitely signs of hope out there. And I will keep my finger on the pulse to see what people are doing. But I would absolutely say get used to doing some more remote, both interviews, management, and then just everyday productivity. So that's what I've got for us.
Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
Yeah. Any questions? Were there any questions? I didn't see any. Nope. I guess you explained everything fully. So.
That's a first.
Yeah, so in true tradition, I put everybody's name in here who doesn't work at Corvus. So this is for the usual $25 Starbucks gift certificate. And I'll let Shelley do the drawing. And the winner is?
Margaret Kenrick. So Margaret, we will email you. Oh, I will allow you to talk. Oops. Where did you go? Oh, there you go. Hi, Margaret. Hi, so I will get your email and I can email you the Starbucks certificate.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for attending. We appreciate it.
It's been great. Thank you. I really appreciate this.
Thanks, everybody. It was a fun experiment, I thought. Doesn't match getting together in person and having a chance to visit and stuff, but it was good. At least we got it in. And some good talks too. Thanks, everybody, for presenting.
All right, thank you and have a good night. And we'll be back in August with another talk and details will be coming soon. Night.
Good night.